So, a huge new trade deal just dropped between the US and China. It's looking like a fragile truce in what's been a really long and messy economic battle. But to really get what this new agreement is all about, you gotta understand the whole backstory, how we even got to this point. And that quote right there, that was President Trump's take right after the big meeting, a 12 out of 10. I mean, that's not just positive, right? That's the kind of enthusiasm that tells you this wasn't just some minor tweak. It signals a massive and maybe unexpected breakthrough. So the big questions are, what's actually in this new deal? And how does it fit into the wild roller coaster history of the US-China trade war? Well, let's dive in and break it all down. Okay, so this new one-year trade deal seems to have pulled both countries back from the edge, at least for now. But here's the thing. This is not the first time we've seen a truce like this. And to really get why this one matters, we need to rewind the clock a bit. Right. So this whole situation didn't just pop up overnight. Not at all. It's really just the latest chapter in a fierce tariff war that kicked off years ago. A war that has completely reshaped the way global trade works. It all got started way back in 2018. The US fired the first shot, hitting China with what are called Section 301 tariffs. The reason? They cited unfair trade practices, things like intellectual property theft. Well, China fired back almost immediately, and what happened next was this classic tit-for-tat cycle. It was like a high-stakes poker game where both sides just kept raising the bet, leading to this massive escalation with Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. The whole thing climaxed with one absolutely staggering number: 145%. That was the peak tariff rate the US slapped on China, a number that honestly would have been totally unthinkable just a few years before. It just goes to show you how incredibly intense this whole conflict got. Now, before all the latest fireworks, both countries had kind of settled into this really tense balance. As you can see from this chart, the average tariff rates were hovering right around 20% on both sides. It was a high number, for sure, but it was symmetrical, basically a very costly stalemate. And that stalemate is what pushed them towards the first real attempt at a ceasefire. And that brings us to the first big attempt to de-escalate this whole thing, the famous Phase 1 deal. It was signed way back in January of 2020. This was supposed to be the big agreement, the one that would finally pause the war and set everyone on a new path forward. So what was actually in it? You can really think of it in two main parts. The first part was a whole bunch of new rules. We're talking stronger protections for intellectual property, an end to forced technology transfers. You get the idea. But the second part, that was the real headline grabber. These absolutely massive purchase commitments from China. And this gets us to a really important concept at the whole deal, something called managed trade. Basically, instead of just letting the free market do its thing, this is where the government steps in. China explicitly promised to buy specific, enormous amounts of US goods. It was definitely controversial, but it was a very direct attempt to rebalance things. So, the billion-dollar question, or, maybe the hundreds of billions of dollars question is, did this super ambitious truce actually work? Did China make good on its promises? And wow, this visual really tells the story, doesn't it? The goal was absolutely huge, but the reality? Well, it fell way short. To be fair, the COVID-19 pandemic threw a massive wrench in the works, creating huge supply chain disruptions and making prices go wild. Hitting those fixed targets became pretty much impossible. And here's maybe the most important thing to remember about that deal. Phase 1 was like hitting the pause button. It was not a peace treaty. It stopped things from getting worse, sure, but it didn't dismantle the weapons. The vast majority of tariffs that both countries had put in place, they stayed right where they were. So after 2021, when all those purchase commitments expired, the whole strategy started to change. The fight shifted away from a broad, all-out tariff war to something a lot more focused, a lot more strategic, and, you could argue, a lot more complicated. You can really see the evolution here. We started with step 1, those broad tariffs that hit just about everything. Then we moved to step 2, targeted controls aimed right at the strategic technologies of the future. We're talking advanced computer chips, electric vehicles, solar panels. And that shift led us to step 3, and a new buzzword that pretty much defines the era we're in now. And that word is de-risking. It's a subtle but really important shift from the old idea you might have heard of, which was decoupling. The goal here isn't to completely separate the US and Chinese economies. Instead, it's about reducing the reliance on China for the most critical technologies and supply chains, all in the name of national security. And that brings us full circle, all the way back to that 12 out of 10 deal that was just announced. Now that we have all that history, we can finally see how this new agreement fits into what's become the new normal for US-China trade. Okay, let's put these two deals side by side. First, look at the tariff levels. They were high back then, and they are persistently high now, with the average US tariff on China sitting at around 48%. The big purchases are back, but they're focused on specific things like soybeans and energy. And the core focus of the deal has narrowed. It's less about some grand rebalancing of trade and more about managing specific annoyances, like port fees and export controls. Oh, and here's a key difference in enforcement. This new deal can be renewed every year, which gives it a lot more teeth. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it looks like we're living in a world of selective interdependence. Trade isn't stopping, not by a long shot, but it's being managed much more carefully. The economic relationship is still there, but it's on a much, much shorter leash, especially when it comes to those really sensitive strategic technologies. And all of this leaves us with one final critical question. Is this new normal, this kind of managed rivalry, a real path to stability? Or is this latest 12 out of 10 deal just another temporary pause in what is actually a much, much longer-term competition between two global superpowers?